Adepticon is all the way underway in the United States, and that means gaming news, seminars, information, including the Corvus Belli 2026 Adepticon seminar, which is what we'll be talking about in this video. To note, this is really just an impressions and my thoughts video. I don't have any special information, although we will be doing a little bit of speculating about the rules for one particular model that is very important to factions of my interest in particular, and we won't really be talking about the Warcrow or Aristea stuff. However, if you're an Aristea player, then the Hexadome Legends re-release looks awesome, and if you're a Warcrow player, my goodness, those feudal knights are nice. At time of recording, I haven't really been pulled into Warcrow terribly much myself yet, but those knights are a little tempting. So, Anyway, let's jump on to talk about stuff that Corvus Belli covered about Infinity in the seminar. So the first big thing is the Caledonia repack. This is very much in the vein of the Shock Army Acontecimento one that they did. It's a limited time re-release of basically everything that you need to play Caledonia. Although I do have like at least one recommendation as to what I would supplement this box with if you decided to go all in on it. Generally, the expectation really is, look, you just buy the whole pack. You get the bonus miniatures because you kind of need all of this stuff to play Caledonia if you're buying fresh. What you get are William Wallace, 3 Volunteers, 2 Galwegians, 2 Mormayers, 2 Highlander Greys. And to note, there's a weapon mix on the Mormayers and Highlander Greys. I think they come with rifles on one and HMG on another in each case, but they're very easy to mix and match. A Mormayer with a rifle is still packing a massive rifle that could believably be a HMG most of the time, so they're fairly flexible sculpts. The old McMurrough sculpt, the metal one, a Cameronian, Caden Don, a Wolver, Usha McNeil, a Cadaran, an old SAS sculpt, although it is still a very nice sculpt, Isabel McGregor, and Armand Lemuet. Now, peering behind the curtain a little bit, it is pretty obvious that they're using this to move some old sculpts, and they'll obviously be recasting some as well. The old McMurrough and Armand Lemuet, for example, I suspect that those are in these boxes as they are to move some old stock, but like Games Workshop does that as well. You see that in Games Workshop battle boxes all the time. It's a very sensible way of getting stuff out the door for a company. The old McMurrough actually, I think, can be turned into a little bit of a strength of this box. And so if you're interested in getting into Caledonia Highlander Army, actually my way of doing it, I recommend, is buy this and then buy the new McMurrough sculpt. The new McMurrough sculpt is really nice, and what that will then give you is a Cameronian Highlander and old McMurrough to use as a second Cameronian Highlander, and then McMurrough, which gives you the 3 Dog Warriors list. I think you can actually run 4. I'm pretty sure the AVA of Cameronians is high enough, but that's enough to do the rapid offensive unit, tip of the spear, Wallace, charge everything in, list archetype that basically, if your opponents don't have MSV ARO to put up to pin those pieces back, you can blow the game out on turn 1. It's the kind of list that has diminishing returns as people learn how to play against it, but it's also really, really fun to play and very cool, and it's good to put the fear of God into people and force them to do a little bit of adapting before you yourself cycle back around to lists that perhaps make more use of things like the Highlander Greys and the Mormayers, etc. Otherwise, I don't really think there are any sculpts in here apart from possibly Lemuet that are kind of wasted, although even Lemuet does serve a very useful role in the Caledonian Highlander army, which is to say sometimes you just need, for example, if you're playing against those Dog Warriors, an MSV ARO piece to put on Overwatch and just pin them back a little bit. So, cool box, cool re-release. The limited edition Defiance Usha sculpt is sick as hell, and a fairly complete entry into the army. You could supplement this a little bit with a few of the pieces here and there that are currently available as part of Cosmoflot, so yep, solid, cool, good release. Significantly lower impact on the overall metagame is just for completeness covering the new ITS pack models. Cien Warrior HMG and the JSA Light Tag, who I'm not going to try and pronounce. Now, interesting thing actually to note is that the Cien Warrior, I believe, is Unicool, which is a very, very nice material to work with, but there's already a Cien Warrior HMG that exists. Anyone who plays like this faction, anyone who plays Imperial Service, for example, or Yuching, probably has one of these models already, and it's not something that you would often take two of. But as a unique little prize given out as part of an ITS event, that's pretty cool. As for the JSA tag, it's not a model that I would take often or at all in any of my JSA lists, so I probably wouldn't go out and buy this ITS pack to have access to these models. But it is a neat resculpt. For some reason, it feels like it's much taller looking than the regular sculpt for this tag, which I think is kind of in this crouched down katana pose. And so that might tickle some people's fancy. Now, speaking of things that tickle fancy, this is a model I kind of want to figure out how to get my hands on. This is a Miranda Ashcroft resculpt, and it is the greatest model pose ever sculpted. It's perfect. It's literally perfect. She's sitting there, she's got her pinky out. Don't think too much about what that historically means. I genuinely want this sculpt just for vibes, which is possibly going to be a shame because I think it's going to be a convention or event exclusive where you'll have to find it at CB attendance at events. So I kind of hope I can get my hands on one of these. I will also just make the note, and this is to break out a little bit of a drum that I've beaten a couple of times on this channel, which is that there was a time quite early after the release of N5 where everyone was getting to grips with all the new profiles and everything, and there were a few people who would bang on about how Miranda Ashcroft was an auto-include in every list, and many of those same people are now the people who are saying things like vehicles are an auto-include in any list, which is why I tend to take those perspectives with a grain of salt. Because Miranda did and still does have the issue of being a little expensive and very single wound and only firing non-lethal rounds if you take her with the emitter, which is the profile you'd usually use for ARO. Yes, she can stall out and brick an enemy attack, she can be quite good at that, but she's also vulnerable, especially to smoke shooting and fundamentally non-lethal, so I never really used her as an ARO piece. But if I had this sculpt, I probably would, because the sheer aura of putting that model in that pose on a building rooftop somewhere watching the battlefield, it is a temptation I don't think I could resist. This is a really, really cool model. Top-notch sculpting on whoever did this. I don't have the credit for the sculptor here. It does appear in some other sculpts that we'll see throughout this video, but whoever did this one, hats off to you. Up next, another resculpt, Riot Grrls. Now, I'm not sure about this one. I saw someone mention, and I think the comment that I saw was that are heavy infantry getting a little bit larger to accommodate Unicool as a material? That's the only information that I have. I may have missed it in the seminar, that these are Unicool or metal. I hope they're Unicool because it's excellent. In terms of resculpts, the Riot Grrls have been one of those profiles that's kind of on the cusp of, you will often see Riot Grrls where it's like, those are the new ones, and that's the really old one, and so just having the 3-pack is kind of nice. They're definitely a profile that has probably drifted out of use by Bakunin slightly more than they should. There's still a lot of utility in some of what they do and bring, but they have been overtaken a little bit by, for example, Cenobites, just in terms of how they fit into the army, etc. Regardless, these sculpts really like. I think they're playing up those like wing things on the head, the like, for lack of a better term, Valkyrie wings that come off of the ears, more than previous sculpts did, and I really like that as a detail. I also don't have it on screen here, but the new concept art for them was pretty cool as well. For lack of a better term, if you're familiar with the old Riot Grrl profile concept art, it was very waifu material, is how I would describe the vibes, which does not really seem appropriate for the thematic nature and story behind Riot Grrls as a regiment. The new concept art has a great deal more attitude to it, and while I am certainly not in an ideal position to make judgments like this, I would say it looks a hell of a lot more punk. And that's really cool. That's what you want from this kind of thing. So if you haven't seen it already, go take a look at the new Riot Grrl concept art as well. But the sculpts, cool. Don't know how much they will necessarily see play because Riot Grrls have fallen out, again, perhaps a little bit unfairly, but there's some fantastic detail there, particularly on the faces, some cool use of the poses, that like salute slash looking out from under the eyes in the center. I kind of personally read it as like a sarcastic salute. That's a pretty sick pose for a miniature. So these are cool. Moving on. Next up for Next Wave, and there'll be a few Next Wave models that we're looking at, we have the Sartroids. These are a very useful profile to have models for. In fact, I would go as far as to say that these are probably the most important profiles in Next Wave. There is absolutely some competition for that, but these are a thing that you see in every single Next Wave list and which did not have models until now. As for the models themselves, that's Ranter on the left, Puzzler on the right. They're not what I imagined, and yeah, they do kind of cement that, okay, Next Wave dinosaurs were kind of a one-off thing. That's just the Tekdrakens, most of the rest of the faction will have other stuff going on. I'm kind of mixed on that. Personally, I get wanting to diversify the vibe. I think you can make a diversified aesthetic look kind of good, but on the other hand, I have some Horizon Zero Dawn models that I use as proxies for these, and I won't be replacing them because they are a vibe that I really like and will continue to use. These guys are okay to me. Look, actually, they're pretty cool, and I think they could fit in very nicely alongside a Next Wave Force, especially with the introduction of some new sculpts that we'll look at that have a bit more of that kind of rounded vibe going on. And of course, the bodysuits are very consistent across most of the line. Jumping away from Next Wave briefly, we're just going through these in the order that CB presented them. We have Thamyris the Eidos. This is technically a guy that had a sculpt already. That sculpt was fine. This is nicer, and I want to make a specific call out to whoever on the painting team made the decision to give him a mustache. That was not reflected in the concept art, but is objectively the correct decision and looks really, really good. If you get one of these guys yourself, if you get Thamyris to add him into your list, and if you're a Steel Phalanx player, you probably will if you don't own him already, because he's very much a key piece kind of model, then I would recommend mirroring the choices made here, because man looks really good with a mustache. Now, back to Next Wave, and the next three sculpts we'll be looking at will all be Next Wave sculpts, and they will just be sculpts, not painted miniatures. This is the Tekdraken Blackheart. This one, I believe, is Blackheart with Contender, and I think the Contender was probably a mistake by Corvus Belli here. This is just a Steeljaw. Yes, it's been reposed, and the repose is really nice, but I have a Tekdraken Steeljaw sitting on the desk next to me right now, and there is no meaningful distinction between a Steeljaw and a Blackheart apart from the gun, and the gun is still ultimately a short, stubby kind of pistol, which is the same gun that the Steeljaw has. This is kind of a miss for me. If you were going to just completely reuse the sculpt, you at least needed to put a big fuck-off cannon of a gun on it so it was visually distinct from the Steeljaw, right? Blackheart is the one with big gun, Steeljaw is the one with small gun. That can kind of work and actually gives you a little bit of interoperability, where if you own one Blackheart and one Steeljaw but are running a list with two Blackhearts, you can be like, oh yeah, no, it's totally fine. The Steeljaw sculpt is the one that is the Blackheart with the Contender, for example. There's some merit to that, but in this case, there's just not enough meaningful visual distinction for me. I would criticize this sculpt. I think if they're going to go with something like this, if this hasn't been put in production yet, they should probably give some serious consideration to taking like a Thunderbolt style cannon like we saw on the Sartroids and actually really bulking this weapon up so it's visually obvious that it's a Blackheart. Alternatively, do a little bit of custom sculpting so that there is some visual differentiation between Steeljaws and Blackhearts. So yeah, in conclusion, I like this sculpt. I think it works quite poorly representing what it's meant to be in the game. Next up, we have the Wraith 1, and this is continuing a theme actually of releases for profiles that are really nice to have access to from a list construction perspective. Wraith 1s aren't a regiment that necessarily always appears in every next wave list, but they do add some really nice flexibility. You can duo a Wraith 1 with a Harbinger and get a relatively cheap, very effective, yeah, it's very single wound, but very effective combat duo that's very lightweight in terms of list construction. And Next Wave needs lightweight additions to list construction very, very badly because their infrastructure at the low level, like their cheap shit, is very non-existent. They hit 13 points as a trooper baseline very quickly, and then there's expensive stuff that you really want. Next Wave is good, but it's an army limitation, and having lightweight combat duos like the Wraith, duoed with a Harbinger, really solid. This sculpt is also, okay, it's a very, very nice sculpt. The visor and the wires going from the visor and the pose and the like chunky fist vambrace on the forearm and then the weight and heft of the multi-marksman, I like all of those things. I do think it's got like maybe 20% too much ass, and I'm saying this about a Corvus Belli model. And I know it's a thing, and I know these days they're pretty good about being equal opportunity with regard to great cake on miniatures. Lord knows the most recent Ajax model, for example. That man is all ass, and that ass is all in the air. But yeah, just the choice of way to present this, it's drawing the eye a little bit, just a little bit. Maybe she could have had a butt flap as well as a front flap. I don't know, maybe not. I do really like this as like the sculpt generally has a ton of great stuff going for it. I like the kind of camo cloak. I love the visor. I love the wires from the visor. It's a little noticeable. It's just a little noticeable, guys, but overall an excellent sculpt. Up next we have Gearheads, which is a sculpt that I am reluctant to call objectively excellent, but it will definitely be something that tickles some people's fancy. The best way to describe this is just over the top, like figuratively and literally. This is this is a really weird looking dude with this huge harness that's like on his head. He's got a massive helmet over the top of things. There's these enormous arms. Okay, yeah, gear head, I guess. I guess I get that. And so this fits into, there is a type of aesthetic which I would say is like, it's for certain people. And I like that generally in design. I remember as far back as Torchlight saying, hey, the whole aesthetic for this army is going to appeal to a specific subset and not to others, but you want to do aesthetic in a way where some people love it and it's okay if, like, you don't want aesthetic that everyone likes a little bit. You want aesthetic that some people super vibe with and it's their thing. And I think this guy is going to be that for probably a subset of next wave players. For me personally, I could actually live quite happily with the derp, but I don't think the sculpt matches what the profiles generally do. Gearheads are, for me, strictly a support regiment. Most of the time, they don't ever activate except in the sense that they are a cyberplug controller. And so this enormous arm armature, like that I would normally associate with things like the Kaitok Assault Regiment, is where we've seen stuff like this before. It's too active for a sculpt that kind of frankly never moves most of the time for me. So for me, I will probably just kitbash some Spare Harbinger sculpts, I think, for my gearheads. But for the people who do like what this guy has going on, he will probably be absolutely adorable. Now, no new sculpt here, but the second to last spoiled announcement is actually one I want to dig into a little, because this is really interesting. So this is Ioann Bann? I'm probably mispronouncing that. It looks like it's meant to be a Scottish or Irish name, but anyway, Varangian Dog Warrior. And here is why he is probably very important as a release. So firstly, who does he work for? He works for O12, Star Martyr, Cosmoflot, White Company, and Tohar. And we are going to be thinking about him specifically from the perspective of Tohar. From the weapon loadout, again, you're not always 100% bounded by what the concept dossier provides as weapons. They're not always accurate. Sometimes they're just like for scale, etc. But often they are accurately reflecting what the profile has in the game. And in this case, we have chain rifle, APT2 CCW, heavy pistol grenades, and smoke grenades. That is probably impossible to fuck up from an efficient, rapid offensive unit assault kind of profile. And that is a huge deal, especially for Tohar. Like, I'm going to assume that he will be a transmutation sculpt because he is shown as having a human form and a dog warrior form, which means that he will probably be wounds 3, transmute once he takes 1, he's a dog warrior, and I wouldn't be surprised if, like, armor 3 in human form, armor 4, maybe 5, but probably 4 in dog warrior form. He looks a lot like a dog warrior, but he's got that huge breastplate and armored arms, so probably armor 4, maybe armor 5 in transmuted form. The weapons are all cheap. Chain rifle, good CCW, heavy pistol, grenades, and smoke grenades. Those don't bloat a profile's cost, which means that even if we tack on some martial arts and some other survivability skill and some weird crap like bang bomb or something that would otherwise bloat the cost of a model, he's just not going to be unaffordably expensive. I could see a cost somewhere in the 30-something points if they really load him for bear in the skills, but just as a point of comparison, a regular dogface is only 21 points. And McMurrough is only 23. So even if he is like, oh, McMurrough, but also the full transmutation rather than just dogged, and that pushes his points up, dude's probably not going to be aggressively expensive. And the profile generally, right? He'll probably be 6'4" move, he'll almost certainly have super jump, he'll almost certainly have multiple wounds, is really valuable, especially for Toha. I haven't played a ton of Toha, but I've played against a lot of it. One of my locals, Ed, is a long-term Spiral player, which means that now he is a Toha player because Spiral doesn't exist in N5. And we've played a lot of games against one another, and we've had a lot of debriefs about the like, hey, what went wrong? What's missing? What do we want in Toha? And the thing that we've drifted towards, right? Like the conclusion over many games is that Toha's got a lot of things going for it. It's also a little behind the curve in some respects in N5 because the old thing that Toha did, which is just have more wounds than everyone else, has kind of lapsed because heavy infantry now broadly are pretty affordable. Like, you have lots of lists in N5 across the board with lots of wounds. Toha aren't necessarily exceptional in that respect. It's still a strength, but it's not like, oh, it's what really sets them apart. And what Toha do have as a weakness is that it's, particularly if you're taking profiles that look nice on the face of them, things like Sukweo Commandos, which are fantastic gunfighters, very 4-4 move without many extra orders. Like, generally speaking, a Toha list is going to be 12, 13 regular, 2, 3 irregular, some lieutenant orders that you might be able to spend independently. Tackaware is very rare. NCO is very rare and exists only on a bad profile. So they play with slow-ish models by N5 standards, with modest, honest order pools by N5 standards, and that means that to get efficiency out of a Toha list, you have to use your fire team movements over the course of a long game, and there are other armies that will still just kind of do that better than you. And especially what that means Toha is missing is turn one, tip of the spear, offensive powerhouses, right? The kind of model that goes, if you give me first turn, I'm going to make you pay. Because Toha can play like from turn two, all that resiliency, all those symbiomates, Warhorse mimetism, ARO pieces, etc. Like, Toha can play the turn two or the second player game pretty well much of the time, but they don't have things that force their opponent to want to take first turn, even if it isn't advantageous in the scenario. They don't have things to capitalize if it's a scenario where going first is good, because you just can't get a triad all the way across the field. And so we have moved toward motorized bounty hunters are kind of an option some of the time. They hit a mine and die, but it is a thing. Or even pieces like Samsa. Samsa is extremely single wound as an extra model, but if he pops off, and he has the mobility and speed and forward deployment to punish the enemy with a turn one attack. But you don't want to be like, oh gosh, Samsa is the piece that we go to. Samsa is kind of a tech piece. There's many things to like about him, but crutching on Samsa is like, bro, no, he's single wound. Sometimes that just won't happen. And so Mr. Bann here, Varangian Dog Warrior, is potentially massive, just in terms of fitting into Toha as a turn one rapid offensive unit that says, I have this piece, you have to put some hard arrows up to stop me. Because once you can force your opponent to do that, Toha have all sorts of ways to take advantage. They've got good gunfighting, good enough gunfighting to clear those arrows. They have Eclipse if your opponent is forced to put up MSV. Ban himself has smoke grenades. Now, that's also relevant. For a very long time, like forever, Toha have had access to okay MSV2 pieces. The Galrail Spitfire is fine. It was very good back in N3. It was okay back in N3. It kind of hasn't been since. And part of the reason why is that Toha has almost always struggled to get good quality non-Eclipse smoke into a list. Technically it exists, it's on the Preceptors, but god, they do not land hits particularly often. Having someone who throws smoke on Fizz 14 or 16, if he's equivalent to a Dog Warrior, is like, okay, cool, well, maybe I'm going to reconsider linking a Galrail Spitfire. I probably won't, but I might, and it adds an option into a list. Him existing unlocks other profiles. So there's a lot here. Oh, and also, he's a transmutation model, which means that you can give him symbio friends. Now, they might add some rule that says you can't do that or something, blah, blah, blah. Don't really know, don't really care. That's speculation. But there's a lot of potential here, right? Just looking at this dossier and saying, all right, what is this dossier likely to mean from a rules perspective? This is potentially a really big deal for Toha, and probably pretty good for all of the other factions that he can join as well. Also, just as a note, something that I really like about the dossier, this is a little detail, but it's cool. See how the armor that he's got on his chest and on his arms, in the human form, the plates are all really close together, and then in the dog form, they've all pulled out and expanded a little bit? That's super neat. That's a really neat way of just visually communicating that the armor expands around him as he transmutes into the werewolf form. That's sick as hell. I hope they capture that on the model. Anyway, really optimistic for this guy. The concept art is rad, and I'm very looking forward to playing him when we get rules for him. Now, second to last thing to talk about is the next two-player battle pack, Operation Mazebreaker, which will include Corregidor and Operation Subsection, I believe. We have an Asura on the right, and I have no idea what that is on the left, other than that it is a Corregidor troop. The Corregidor gentleman is packing some kind of like heavy multi-weaponry. Looks like it might be a flamethrower underslung to something like, I don't think that's a Nomad HMG, but it's got kind of vibes like it. So some sort of heavy or medium, look, frankly, he looks like a medium infantry, he doesn't look like a heavy infantry, he's not power armored enough. But I am really digging the deep space helmet vibe. And then the Asura is less booby than the previous Asura sculpt, at least from the looks of it. Still very feminine, still very dangerous, still that like combat L-host kind of vibe. Carrying a Spitfire, no idea if that sword armature she's got strapped to her wrist is going to reflect in a close combat style profile. We might see something like the Swiss Guard, if you're familiar with the Swiss Guard with sword profile, which gives just one Swiss Guard frankly bad close combat stats, but like, oh, it's good enough to maybe get into CC. We might see something like that, or it could just be a visual flourish. Very cool, very interesting. And the weird alien cardboard terrain shit in the middle is super strange. What's probably most interesting about this is it represents potentially a significant, like, further flex in the card terrain that CB has been producing. All the modern stuff is pretty good. In particular, they made a little bit. So the oldest card terrain was bad, but it was like a decade ago now, probably longer. The more recent snap together card terrain, the first generations of that, of which I have a significant amount, were good, but a bit of a nightmare to assemble, where you had to like force the last few pieces together and hope you didn't just permanently damage the card. The more recent versions, like the Sand Trap versions, that came out with Kestrel and Shinden Butai did not have that problem. All of those went together like a dream, with none of that like last piece, force it together, hope that it doesn't break situation. So they've improved the assembly, especially over time. This is very different aesthetically. This is like, what the hell is going on here? Mazebreaker gives us a little bit of a hint something weird is happening, but this shit is like Geiger-esque Pyrexian terrain. So no idea what's going on with that narratively. And speaking of narratively, this is a screen grab from the live seminar. I don't think this was actually distributed when Corvus Belli distributed the slide pack and part of their like Facebook announcements and stuff, but that's a familiar looking logo on the right there. Kind of cool. I can't actually say anything about this, but just to quote what was said in the Corvus Belli seminar, there will be a narrative campaign coming in May, and that these podcasts and channels will be involved. They're helping work on it. This is something I'm excited for, tinkering away behind the scenes. Very cool to have a little bit of official collaboration with the company. And of course, all of these podcasts are great value. That's Whip 12, Metachemistry, Loss of Lieutenant, and of course my channel, if you're not familiar with any of those. I'm sure you'll hear more about this from all of us, either as we get closer to or in May itself when all of this comes live. So narrative campaign is coming. That's going to be pretty cool. And I'll say more about it when I can. Anyway, that's everything that was covered for Infinity at the Adepticon seminar. Just a really quick video to give some thoughts and opinions. Interested in hearing from all of you as to what was interesting in the reveals, what you're excited for, what you're looking forward to. For me, it's definitely the new Dog Warrior, but if I can get my hands on the new Miranda sculpt, it will be that as well. And with that, we'll wrap it up there. Hoping to have a video coming out about midweek, which will technically be Infinity adjacent. And otherwise, we'll be back next week, as always, for more Infinity content. Hope very much that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you then.